The Pacific Ocean doesn't care about your dreams. It doesn't care about your 23 years of marriage, your meticulously planned retirement, or the fact that you've sailed these waters 100 times before. What happened to David and Sarah Mitchell in the autumn of 2023 is a story that will haunt every sailor who hears it. Because what the Coast Guard discovered that cold October morning rewrites everything we thought we knew about love, betrayal, and the depths of human desperation. This isn't just another sailing disaster. This is a psychological thriller that played out on the open ocean, where the only witnesses were the waves and the wind. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the Coast Guard classified this case as one of the most disturbing maritime incidents in Pacific Northwest history. You'll learn why Sarah's final note, written in her own blood, changed everything investigators thought they knew about what really happened aboard the sailing vessel Second Wind. If you've ever dreamed of sailing into the sunset with someone you love, this story will make you question everything you think you know about the person sleeping next to you. Because sometimes the most dangerous storms aren't the ones you can see coming on the weather radar. David Mitchell was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. At 61 years old, he had the weathered hands of someone who'd spent his life working with tools, first as a master carpenter for 35 years, then as a boat restorer who could make rotting wood sing again. His workshop in Port Townsend, Washington, was legendary among the sailing community. Boats came to him broken and left reborn. Sarah was his perfect complement. Methodical where he was intuitive, cautious where he was confident. At 58, she had retired early from her position as a senior accountant at a prestigious Seattle firm, her reputation for catching financial discrepancies earning her the nickname the Bloodhound. Her colleagues used to joke that Sarah could spot a penny out of place from across a crowded room. She brought that same meticulous attention to detail to everything in her life, including their shared dream. That dream had been taking shape for over 2 decades. It started with a magazine subscription to Cruising World that Sarah had given David for his 40th birthday. Every month, they'd sit at their kitchen table, coffee growing cold as they pored over stories of couples who had traded suburban life for endless horizons. The dream crystallized when they attended the Seattle Boat Show in 2018 and saw her, a 1987 Catalina 42, neglected and sad, her fiberglass hull stained with years of neglect, her bright work dull and forgotten. "She's got good bones," David had whispered to Sarah as they walked around the boat. Sarah had run her hand along the hull, feeling for soft spots with the systematic precision she brought to everything. When she found none, she looked at her husband with that smile he'd fallen in love with 30 years earlier. "She's ours," Sarah had said simply. They named her Second Wind, partly because she was getting a second chance at life, partly because they were getting their second wind at an age when most couples were settling into retirement routines. David spent the next 4 years transforming her. Every evening after work, every weekend, every vacation day was devoted to the restoration. He stripped her down to her bones and built her back up stronger than she'd ever been. Sarah became the quartermaster of their future. She researched weather patterns, studied ocean currents, learned celestial navigation even though they had GPS. She took courses in marine first aid, radio operation, and emergency procedures. Their garage became a staging area for their new life. Medical supplies, spare parts, emergency rations, water makers, solar panels. She created spreadsheets for everything: food inventory, equipment maintenance schedules, passage planning, budget tracking down to the penny. Their friends thought they were crazy. "You're giving up everything," David's brother had said at their going-away party. "Your house, your friends, your security. For what? To live like homeless people on a boat?" But David and Sarah had never been more certain of anything. They'd invested not just their life savings, over $400,000, but their hearts, their dreams, their very identities into this vision of freedom. Sarah had calculated that they could live comfortably on their combined pensions and retirement savings for 15 years if they were careful. 15 years of sunrises over empty oceans, of discovering hidden anchorages, of living simply and authentically. The first year exceeded their wildest dreams. They left Port Townsend in June 2022, heading south along the coast. San Francisco Bay welcomed them with perfect weather and friendly sailors. The passage to Monterey was textbook perfect. Steady winds, calm seas, dolphins racing their bow wake. Sarah's meticulous planning paid off again and again. When other cruisers ran into problems, David and Sarah always had the right spare part, the right tool, the right solution. By the time they reached Southern California, they'd found their rhythm. David handled the sailing and the mechanical systems. Sarah managed navigation, communications, and supplies. They'd developed their own language of looks and gestures, the kind of wordless communication that comes from years of partnership. Other cruisers started seeking them out for advice. They became known in the harbors as the couple who had everything figured out. The passage to Hawaii in the spring of 2023 was their graduation exam, and they passed with honors. 21 days of mostly perfect sailing, arriving in Honolulu exactly on schedule, their water tanks still half full, their food supplies barely touched. Sarah's navigation had been flawless. They'd made landfall within 2 miles of their planned position after 3 weeks at sea. "We're living the dream," David wrote in their blog that night, anchored in the crystal-clear waters of Kaneohe Bay. "Every challenge we've faced has made us stronger, more confident, more in love with this life and with each other." But paradise, as they discovered, could be suffocating. After 6 months in the islands, moving from anchorage to anchorage, they both felt a restlessness they hadn't expected. The routine that had sustained them on passage began to feel like a rut. Sarah, who had thrived on the complex logistics of passage making, found herself with too much time and too little to organize. It was Sarah who first suggested they needed a new challenge. "We've proven we can do the easy stuff," she said one evening as they watched another perfect Hawaiian sunset. "But we haven't really tested ourselves yet." David knew what she meant. They'd sailed in pleasant conditions, on well-traveled routes, with reliable weather forecasts and good communications. They'd never faced a real emergency, never had to dig deep and discover what they were truly made of. The plan they hatched over the following weeks was ambitious but not reckless. They would leave Hawaii in late September, timing their departure to catch the favorable weather patterns that would take them northeast toward the Pacific Northwest. It was a challenging passage, 1,500 miles of open ocean, but one that many cruisers completed successfully each year. Sarah threw herself into the planning with renewed energy. She studied weather patterns going back 20 years, identifying the optimal departure windows. She researched emergency procedures, updated their safety equipment, and created contingency plans for every scenario she could imagine. David went over every system on the boat twice, replacing anything that showed even the slightest sign of wear. They departed Honolulu on September 28, 2023, under perfect conditions. The trade winds filled their sails as they cleared Diamond Head, and Sarah's initial weather routing looked flawless. For the first 5 days, everything went according to plan. They made good time, the boat handled beautifully, and their systems performed flawlessly. But on October 3rd, something changed. Not in the weather, that remained benign. Not in the boat's performance. Second wind continued to sail smoothly through moderate seas. The change was in Sarah. David first noticed it during the evening watch change. Sarah, who had always been punctual to the point of compulsion, was 15 minutes late relieving him. When she finally emerged from below, her usual systematic approach to checking instruments and reviewing conditions seemed scattered, distracted. "You okay, honey?" David asked as he prepared to go below for his rest. "Fine," Sarah replied, but she didn't meet his eyes, just tired. Over the next 3 days, Sarah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would spend hours staring at the GPS, rechecking calculations she'd already verified multiple times. She started waking David at odd hours, claiming she heard strange noises or saw lights on the horizon that weren't there. Most disturbing to David, she began questioning decisions they'd made together, second-guessing their route, their timing, even their decision to make the passage at all. Maybe we should turn around, she said on the morning of October 7th. They were 800 miles from Hawaii, 700 miles from the west coast, truly committed to their course. I don't like this. Something feels wrong. David tried to reassure her. The weather forecast remained favorable. Their position was exactly where Sarah's meticulous planning had predicted, and the boat was performing perfectly. It's just passage-making anxiety, he said. Remember how nervous you were before our first overnight sail. This is normal, but it wasn't normal. And deep down, David knew it. In all their years together, through all their adventures and challenges, Sarah had never shown this kind of doubt, this kind of fear. She had always been his rock, the steady presence that allowed him to take reasonable risks, because he knew she had considered every angle. On October 8th, David woke from his afternoon rest to find Sarah hunched over their laptop, typing furiously. When he approached, she slammed the computer shut with a violence that shocked him. "I need some privacy," she snapped. "Can't I have one goddamn minute to myself on this floating prison?" The words hit David like a physical blow. Sarah had never spoken to him like that, never called their beloved boat a prison. This wasn't the woman he'd married, wasn't the partner he'd shared this dream with for over 20 years. That evening, as they settled into their night watch routine, David tried to address what was happening. "Sarah, we need to talk about what's going on. You're not yourself. Maybe we should consider diverting to San Francisco, get you checked out by a doctor." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A doctor? You think I'm crazy, is that it? Maybe I am. Maybe I've finally realized what we've really done. We've thrown away everything for this fantasy, and for what? To be trapped on a boat in the middle of nowhere with someone who thinks I'm losing my mind." The argument that followed was unlike anything in their marriage. Accusations flew that David was selfish, that Sarah was ungrateful, that they'd made a terrible mistake. Sarah accused David of manipulating her into this life, of never listening to her doubts. David accused Sarah of sabotaging their dream just when they were on the verge of their greatest achievement. It ended with Sarah storming below, slamming the companionway hatch so hard that David worried she'd cracked the plexiglass. He spent the rest of the night alone on deck, trying to make sense of what was happening to his wife, to his marriage, to the life they'd so carefully built together. The next morning, October 9th, Sarah seemed calmer. She apologized for the previous night, claimed she'd been overtired and stressed. But David noticed she avoided his eyes when she spoke, and her smile seemed forced, artificial. Still, he was grateful for any return to normalcy, however fragile. That afternoon, while David napped, Sarah took over the watch. When he woke at sunset to take his turn, he found the cockpit empty. "Sarah?" he called. No answer. He went below and found her bunk empty, her personal items scattered as if she'd been searching for something. "Sarah!" he called more urgently. He searched every compartment, every possible hiding place on their 42-foot boat. She was simply gone. Panic set in immediately. David activated their emergency beacon, sent out a mayday call, deployed their emergency life raft, thinking maybe she'd fallen overboard, and somehow managed to reach it. He spent the night sailing in expanding square searches, using their powerful spotlight to scan the water, calling her name until his voice was raw. As dawn broke on October 10th, David faced the impossible reality. His wife of 23 years had vanished from their sailboat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But how? The lifelines were intact, the safety harnesses unused. There was no indication of a struggle, no sign of an accident. People don't just disappear from boats. The Coast Guard response was swift and professional. A helicopter arrived within 4 hours, followed by a cutter. They conducted an extensive search, covering over 2,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing, no trace of Sarah, no sign that anyone had ever gone overboard from second wind. But they did find something else, something that would haunt David for the rest of his life and puzzle investigators for months to come. While searching the boat for clues about Sarah's disappearance, Lieutenant Commander Janet Rodriguez, the lead investigator, discovered a hidden compartment behind the chart table that David claimed to know nothing about. Inside was a laptop computer that wasn't the one Sarah had been using regularly, along with a thick folder of documents and what appeared to be a journal written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. The journal entries started months before their departure from Hawaii, revealing a side of Sarah that David claimed never to have seen. The early entries were mundane: complaints about the crowded anchorages, frustration with their limited internet connectivity, doubts about the wisdom of their lifestyle choice. But as the entries progressed, they revealed a growing paranoia and resentment that painted a very different picture of their perfect cruising life. Day 127 at anchor in Hanauma Bay, read one entry, dated July 15th, 2023. David thinks this is paradise, but I feel like we're in prison. We can't go anywhere without asking permission from the harbor master. We can't do anything without checking the weather, the tides, the wind. I used to have a career, respect, independence. Now I'm just the navigator on David's dreamboat. The entries grew darker as the weeks passed. Sarah wrote about feeling trapped, about regretting the decision to sell their house and give up their old life. She described David as controlling and obsessive, accusing him of manipulating her into this lifestyle to fulfill his own selfish fantasies. But it was the later entries, written during their final passage, that truly shocked investigators. Sarah had become convinced that David was planning to kill her, that their isolated location in the middle of the Pacific made the perfect cover for murder. Day 12 at sea, she wrote. I see the way David looks at me when he thinks I'm not watching. There's something cold in his eyes, calculating. I think he knows I want out of this life and he can't accept it. Easier to have a tragic accident at sea than a messy divorce that would expose what we've really become. The final entry, dated October 9th, the day she disappeared, was the most chilling of all. I know what I have to do. He'll never let me leave, never let me have my old life back. He'd rather see me dead than lose control of me. But I won't give him the satisfaction. If I'm going to die out here, it will be on my terms, not his. But it was what investigators found with the journal that truly defied explanation. Tucked between the pages was a note, written in what forensic analysis later confirmed was Sarah's own blood. The truth dies with me. David, you win, but everyone will know what you really are. The implications were staggering. Had Sarah planned her own death to frame her husband for murder? Had she somehow managed to kill herself in a way that left no trace, no body, no evidence except this cryptic message? Or was this evidence of something even more sinister? David's reaction to these discoveries was one of complete shock and denial. He insisted he had never seen the journal, never known about the hidden compartment, never suspected that Sarah harbored such dark thoughts about their life together. His grief seemed genuine, his confusion complete. "That's not the woman I married," he kept repeating to investigators. "That's not the woman who planned this trip with me, who worked side by side with me to make this dream happen. Someone else wrote those things. Someone else had to have planted that evidence." The Coast Guard investigation stretched on for weeks. They subjected Second Wind to forensic examination that would have impressed CSI. They found no trace of blood anywhere on the boat except for the small amount used to write the final note. They found no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone had gone overboard. The boat's systems were all functioning normally, the safety equipment unused. David submitted to multiple polygraph tests, all of which he passed. His story never changed. He had gone below for his afternoon rest, leaving Sarah on watch. When he woke, she was gone. He had no explanation for how or why she disappeared, no knowledge of her apparent psychological deterioration, no awareness of her plans. The case became a sensation in the sailing community. Forums lit up with theories and speculation. Some believed David was a master manipulator who had driven his wife to suicide and somehow concealed the evidence. Others thought Sarah had staged her own disappearance, possibly swimming to a pre-positioned boat or life raft that allowed her to escape her old life entirely. Still others believed there were forces at play that no one understood, that something supernatural or inexplicable had occurred in those empty waters of the North Pacific. The truth, as investigators slowly pieced it together from the evidence, was both simpler and more complex than anyone had imagined. The breakthrough came when FBI behavioral analysts were brought in to examine Sarah's journal entries more closely. What they found was a pattern consistent with a severe psychological break, possibly brought on by the isolation and stress of extended cruising, possibly underlying mental health issues that had gone undiagnosed for years. Dr. Rachel Chen, the FBI's lead behavioral analyst on the case, explained their findings. What we see in Sarah's journal is a classic case of paranoid delusion combined with what we call exit planning. She had become convinced that her husband posed a threat to her life, and she developed an elaborate plan to escape that threat while simultaneously punishing the person she held responsible for her situation. The analysts believed that Sarah had been planning her disappearance for weeks, possibly months. The hidden compartment, the secret laptop, the journal entries, all were part of an elaborate setup designed to implicate David in her death while giving her the opportunity to start a new life. But how had she accomplished the actual disappearance? The answer, when it finally came, was as ingenious as it was heartbreaking. 3 months after Sarah's disappearance, a Japanese fishing vessel operating 600 miles west of Second Wind's last known position pulled in their nets to find an unusual catch: a waterproof bag containing Sarah's passport, credit cards, and a detailed suicide note that told a very different story than the blood-written message found on the boat. In this note, Sarah confessed to having orchestrated her own disappearance. She had spent months preparing for what she called her escape plan. Using skills learned during her accounting career, she had systematically moved money into hidden accounts. She had researched boat traffic patterns and identified a cargo vessel that would pass within swimming distance of their planned route. On the night of October 9th, while David slept below, Sarah had lowered their emergency dinghy over the side and paddled to a predetermined rendezvous point. She had arranged to be picked up by a fishing vessel whose crew had been paid handsomely to ask no questions and make no reports. But something had gone wrong. Whether she had miscalculated the distance, misjudged the sea conditions, or simply lost her nerve at the last moment, Sarah never made it to her rendezvous. The waterproof bag containing her identification and confession had been designed to be thrown overboard only after she was safely aboard the fishing vessel. Instead, it became her unintended tombstone, the only evidence of her final, desperate gambit for freedom. The blood-written note found on Second Wind, investigators concluded, had been prepared in advance as part of Sarah's plan to implicate David in her disappearance. She had used a small lancet from their medical supplies to draw her own blood, writing the message before beginning her escape attempt. It was meant to be found after she had successfully disappeared, providing apparent evidence of foul play while she started a new life under a false identity. Instead, it became the signature on her own death warrant. David was officially cleared of any wrongdoing in his wife's disappearance and presumed death, but the exoneration brought him no peace. He found himself haunted not just by Sarah's loss, but by the revelation that the woman he thought he knew better than anyone had been a stranger to him. How long had she been planning to leave him? How many of their shared moments had been lies? How could he have missed the signs of her psychological deterioration so completely? The sailing community was divided in their reaction to the case's resolution. Some viewed David with suspicion despite the official findings, wondering if a man clever enough to restore a boat to perfection might also be clever enough to orchestrate the perfect crime. Others saw him as the ultimate victim, a man who had lost not only his wife, but his faith in their shared reality. David eventually sailed Second Wind back to the west coast alone, a journey that took him 3 weeks of solitary sailing through the same waters where Sarah had made her final fatal decision. He sold the boat immediately upon reaching port, unable to bear the memories and associations it held. The case file remains open technically, since Sarah's body was never recovered. But for all practical purposes, the mystery of what happened aboard Second Wind in October 2023 has been solved. It wasn't the ocean that claimed Sarah Mitchell. It was the prison of her own making, the trap of a dream that had become a nightmare, the desperation of someone who saw death as preferable to a life she no longer wanted. The lesson here isn't about the dangers of sailing or the risks of life at sea. Those dangers are real and well documented, but they're not what destroyed David and Sarah Mitchell. The real lesson is about the danger of not truly knowing the person you share your life with, about the assumptions we make about love and partnership, about the way isolation and stress can reveal aspects of personality that years of ordinary life keep hidden. Every relationship is a boat carrying two people across the uncertain waters of life. We assume we know how our partner will react when the storms come. We assume we're sailing toward the same destination. But sometimes, in the darkest moments of the longest nights, we discover that the person we thought we knew has been planning a different course all along. The blood-written note that Sarah left behind still haunts everyone who worked the case. The truth dies with me. David, you win, but everyone will know what you really are. In the end, the only truth that died with Sarah was the truth about herself, the depth of her desperation, the elaborate lengths she went to in pursuit of escape, the tragic miscalculation that turned her bid for freedom into a death sentence. David Mitchell returned to his workshop in Port Townsend, but friends say he never quite recovered from discovering that his perfect marriage had been built on a foundation of hidden resentment and secret planning. He died in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 63, his heart finally giving out under the weight of too many questions that would never have answers. The sea keeps its secrets well, but sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't hidden in its depths. They're carried in the hearts of the people we think we know best. If this story teaches us anything, it's that the most treacherous waters we'll ever navigate aren't marked on any chart. They're the uncharted depths of the human heart, where love and hatred, dreams and nightmares can exist side by side without our knowledge until the moment when everything we believed comes crashing down around us like a mast, snapping in an unexpected squall. For every sailor who dreams of sailing into the sunset with someone they love, remember this: make sure you're both navigating toward the same horizon. Because the alternative, as David and Sarah Mitchell learned too late, can be a voyage into darkness from which only one of you returns.